Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Origins of the Cold War lecture. Your objective today is to really understand how the United States, Soviet Union, Western allies, how we go from a place of cooperation at the end of World War II in defeating the Nazis to a point where the enemy becomes each other, and especially the Soviet Union communist countries versus the United States, Britain, and democratic allies. So, how do we go from that place? How do we go from where, hey, let's work together in a spirit of cooperation to defeat the Nazis, and yet a few short years later, we are bitter enemies? So, make sure you're taking good notes and the understanding of this. And I want to start off with this guy to really get into understanding the origins of the Cold War. You really have to understand the role that Karl Marx plays and the shadow that he casts on really the last half of the 20th century. Because it really, actually, almost all of the 20th century. You see, Karl Marx, writing in the 1800s, believed that history was basically a class warfare. It was the wealthy always in control of countries, always establishing a system in which the workers would always have to do the majority of work and all the difficult things in society, while the wealthy elites basically got to take advantage of the system. It's not like they didn't have to do work too, but they got a far greater share of the world's resources, etc., than the workers did. And in Karl Marx's idea, this was completely unfair. And he believed that the key core principle behind his thinking was that workers of the world deserve more. Workers who do most of the work in society deserve a greater share of the resources and therefore at the expense of the wealthy elites. And so, one of the slogans of what we come to know as communism, although technically it's not really communism, but one of the things we call communism, the core of it, a core slogan, according to Marx, is workers of the world unite. He believed that workers throughout the world should unite to overthrow the capitalist system and set up a system that would make it fair and beneficial for all workers. I think he had a very optimistic view of humans that we could just overthrow the elites. And once the elites were out of the picture, then workers would all just work for the benefit of each other, and that somehow things would be just hunky dory if we just got rid of the elite capitalists. But you got to understand the shadow that this guy casts. Because in 1917, when the Bolshevik Revolution happens in the Soviet Union, and Vladimir Lenin eventually establishes the Soviet Union under the principles of Karl Marx, under the basic principles. Now, Lenin had some differences, but the basic idea was that, yeah, we're going to force this socialism, this idea where everybody's going to be equal and it's the workers that get the benefits from their work. And so, at the basis of it, Lenin's application of Karl Marx ideas is very much like pro worker, and that the workers would benefit from this system. Now, we know there's a lot of problems with the system, it doesn't work, but at this time, this is the first country that's really trying it. Lenin dies and Joseph Stalin takes over, and Stalin really becomes a dictator and tries to force change in the country, continuing under this idea that the worker gets his fair share in society. So you have to understand that idea because in the capitalist world, this guy is extremely dangerous. If you believe that capitalism has led to opportunity for many and that anybody can rise up and make a better life for themselves through hard work, through an education, etc., then this guy is dangerous because he says, no, that doesn't work. he says that capitalism must be overthrown. And so if you have benefited from capitalism, the fact that he's saying workers of the world have to unite against you, that becomes a dangerous theme. And that's at the core, I believe. That's at the core of what's going to become the Cold War. All right. So, first of all, you have to understand that as World War II is being fought, the great enemy is Hitler. The great enemy is the Nazi Germany, with a second vote going to Japan. So Nazi Germany, and then maybe like a third vote going to, of course, Mussolini's Italy. But the big enemy is Hitler, then probably followed by Japan. Now, therefore, the allied countries are working together. The Soviets, the United States, Britain, and all of the allies that are working to defeat Hitler. Now, they meet from time to time in what becomes known as a conference. Okay. And so in 1944, the big three, let me show you the big three here. This is Winston Churchill, the leader of Great Britain at the time, and very influential. This guy is Franklin D. Roosevelt, an incredibly influential United States president. And then also this guy, one of the most influential people in all of history, and his name is Joseph Stalin. So these three guys meet. This is a huge meeting. And they first meet in Tehran, in Iran. And the big thing at this point, it's early 1944, is hey, Britain and France, or sorry, Britain and the United States, you've got to open up a second front. This is like Russia's big demand. You guys have got to open a second front to take off pressure. We talked about this during World War II. The United States' big demand is, hey, Russia, declare war on Japan. Help us out here. Right at this point, the United States and Britain are the only countries going against Japan, and so Britain and the United States really want the support of Russia to help end the war in Japan as well. But they also both agree that Hitler's the bigger target. We got to take Hitler out first at all costs. He's the most dangerous one. Then in early 1945, the big three meet again in Yalta. Yalta is in the Black Sea, or it's a resort town in the Black Sea region in Soviet territory. And this one is a little bit more controversial. The Soviets start talking about, because at this point, 1945, you can start kind of talking about, hey, we've got Germany on the run at this point. Germans are basically on their last leg. They're losing everywhere. The United States and Britain opened up a second front in France, and they're pushing the Germans back in the West. Sorry, and the Soviets are pushing Germany back in the east. It's only a matter of time, really, before Germany is defeated. And so now you got to start talking about, okay, so once we beat these guys, what are we going to do with them? And the Soviets really want to make Germany pay. That is their primary goal. We've got to make Hitler pay. We've got to make the Nazis pay. And from a Soviet perspective, look, you've gone through the last two wars losing more people than any other country. The Russia had lost millions of its citizens in World War One, and in World War II, estimates are the Soviets probably lost about 20 million people from its country. It's about 10 million of those are civilians. 10 million civilians in Russia die. And Germany has been the cause of it both times. And so from their perspective, they're like, dude, we can never let anything like this happen again. We got burned twice now. And so we got to make Germany pay. Not only that, we need a buffer zone. We need an area that like we can use as protection against a future German aggression. Uh, Churchill doesn't want to make Germany pay. And the reason for that is what happened with World War One, and when the British and French tried to take out their revenge on Germany, it just led to World War Two. So Churchill's like, no. And again, I also think Churchill has a bigger picture in mind. He's more worried about communism than he is about post-war Germany, and so he doesn't really want to take that harsh stance towards Germany. So Roosevelt, it's up to Roosevelt, the US president, to try to find a compromise. And his big idea is he wants the United Nations. This is very similar to Wilson wanting the League of Nations back in 1917, 1918. Roosevelt wants to get the United Nations passed. And so, in order to get these things, they end up making some concessions. And that is, we're going to be pretty harsh to Germany after the war. There's going to be some things to make sure Germany can no longer be an aggressive nation. By July of 1945, Roosevelt has actually died. Roosevelt dies in April of 1945. And so, new US president takes the role, and that would be Harry Truman, right here in the middle. So now at Potsdam in 1945, Truman meets with Churchill and Stalin. Churchill actually only makes it through half of the conference before he is replaced by Clement Attlee, but I'm not going to give you a picture of him. So just understand this next big three is Truman. And at this conference, it's where Truman gets word that the United States actually has an atomic bomb, and he lets the Soviets and British kind of in on the secret. It's at this conference, though, that things start breaking down. Because by July of 1945, the Soviets have already taken out Hitler at Berlin. The Germans are gone. There's no more Nazi Germany. The war's over in Europe. So the only war that still exists is in Japan. The United States is still fighting Japan primarily. Britain doesn't really have enough resources to really help out. So it's basically the United States versus Japan. And the United States really wants Russia to get involved. It's going to take a lot for Russia to get involved. They got to get all their troops from fighting the Nazis way over in Germany, and they got to get them 7,000 miles away, along with all the supplies, food, etc. This is a big undertaking. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of effort. But to the United States, this is very important to them. And so Stalin agrees that he will start getting his troops, start getting stuff over to the east, where they can then start taking on Japan and take some pressure off the Americans. And he eventually agrees that he'll establish August 15th as the day that Russia will declare war on Japan. And then Truman drops the bomb. Remember the dates that Truman drops the bomb: August 6th and then August 9th. Like a week and a half before Russia was supposedly going to declare war on Japan. Why would Truman do this? A lot of people believe that the way our American policy had been established was like, we needed to send a message to the Soviets because it's already starting to break down this relationship, even before the war is officially over. That the American president wanted to send a message: hey, guess what, Russia? Look what we have. We have the most deadly device ever created by humans. It can destroy entire cities with one bomb. And we have it, and we're not afraid to use it. Is it possible that this is just a little bit of an intimidation factor here? Like, hey, Stalin, look what we have. Don't mess with us. Look what we have. You better give in to our suggestions here at the end of the war. And so the bomb itself dropped when it is, in a way that also leads to a lot of distrust, and Soviet and American relationships they're already probably fractured, but they're going to be declining even more. I wanted to show you this map just because you can see that this is like 1945, and you can see, here's Berlin here, that the American and French troops are trying to push into Germany from this side. The Soviets are pushing in from this side. And the Soviet troops, and they have the largest army in the world, the Soviet troops are already in most of Europe. And as you've pushed back the Nazis, I mean, think about it. You've just pushed out the government out, you've just pushed the troops out of these territories like Hungary and Poland. And now Soviet troops are basically in control of the country. They get to kind of establish what's happening in these regions. And remember, Stalin wants a buffer zone. He wants a protection area from any more possible future invasions from Germany. And so what's going to happen in Eastern Europe is a point of contention. Look, the United States, Britain would say, look, we want a Poland to regain its freedom and become a free country with free elections. We also want the same for Hungary and Romania and Yugoslavia and all these countries in Eastern Europe. We want them to be able to choose their own governments. Now, Britain and the United States would probably like those countries to be democracies and trade with the United States and Britain. The Soviet Union would like those states to be pro Soviet Union and trade with them and serve as a buffer zone between them and Germany. Another thing that is an outcome of the war is Germany gets divided into four zones. Churchill actually didn't want this. This was a demand from Stalin himself. So Germany is divided into four zones. You have the British zone, the French zone, the American zone, oops, and then the Soviet zone. And the idea was each of those countries would rebuild Germany as they saw fit in their zones and also get reparations from those areas, etc. In Berlin itself, so this is a little offset of Berlin here. Berlin is going to be divided into four zones as well, a Soviet zone as well as an American, British, and French zone in Berlin. So you actually have a separated Berlin and a Germany that is now under the control of four different countries. So that's one outcome of 1945. Another thing that happens is the United Nations gets created. It gets created primarily as a deliberative body to kind of talk about issues before they become issues, to help countries solve problems. And so, if two little countries have a problem, the rest of the world could kind of come and say, well, no, here's what should happen. We're going to take this country's side versus this country's side, and kind of be basically a vote of popular opinion. Whose side will the rest of the world take when there's a conflict between two? And therefore, the idea was, well, you can also therefore avoid war. If you're in the wrong, the rest of the world will be like, no, you're wrong, we're against you. And so that would prevent you from being an aggressor nation. The United Nations does have the ability to send troops, to raise and send troops in order to end conflicts. And so there is a military aspect to this. However, one of the things put in the charter is that any member of the five permanent members of this, so there's a Security Council that gets established, and the Security Council is in charge of actually military action if there is any that needs to be done. And the thing is, there's five permanent members of the Security Council: France, Britain, United States, China, and the Soviet Union. And any one of those could say, nope, we veto any military action. So this kept basically the Soviet Union with a lot of power because it could veto any military action by the United Nations. So that's going to severely limit the ability of the United Nations to send troops around the world. Then 1946, the Soviets renege on free elections. They ban democratic parties and basically give a whole lot of money and support to communist parties in Eastern Europe, and communists take control of 6 different Eastern European countries. These countries become known as satellite nations because basically they relied on the Soviet Union, the governments of these countries, the communist leaders of these countries. They really couldn't do a whole lot on their own. They relied on the Soviet Union. They relied on the military of the Soviet Union, the strength of the Soviet Union. And so if the Soviet Union told these people in Poland or Hungary what to do, you basically had to do it. So therefore, technically, Poland is its own country, but does it basically have to do whatever the Soviet Union says? Yes. So therefore, it's a satellite nation. And so that's what you see here. In February of 1946, Stalin goes before the lawmaking body of the Soviet Union and basically says, hey, guess what? War with the United States, war with the West is inevitable, that we're eventually going to have to go to war against these people. And so we better ready for war. And so they start really building up their military. Now, you're done with World War II. Most countries want to like draw down their military and stop paying and stop trying to build this up. You want peace to exist. And the Soviet Union is like, no, war is going to happen. We're going to build up our military. Keep in mind, remember, and this is a key piece here. Karl Marx had said there'd be a worldwide revolution where workers would overthrow capitalism everywhere. So the question that you have to ask yourself if you're a democratic capitalist country, does the Soviet Union still want this to happen? Is Joseph Stalin for Karl Marx style worldwide revolution of the workers? Will they therefore do a bunch of things to try to bring down the elites, to try to bring down the capitalist systems? Will they be trying to undermine what's going on in democratic countries? Will they try to help workers overthrow their governments? Will they send money to communist groups in the United States trying to get them to overthrow our country? Will they try to use propaganda to convince Americans that a communist system is better, et cetera, et cetera? And so one of the issues is that we just don't know what Stalin's real goals here are. And so a lot of Americans, especially if like, okay, so let's just take what was just happening in Eastern Europe. If the Soviets don't allow free elections in a Poland, they basically force Poland to become communist. In the capitalist mindset, are you like, yep, see, he wants all countries to become communist. Does Stalin want all countries in the world to become communist? Do you have to suspect it? Do you have to worry about it? And therefore, does Stalin's intentions become suspicious? Anything he does is going to be like, ooh, maybe he's trying to get countries to become communist. Maybe he's trying to overthrow us. And so there becomes a lot of suspicion on the part of capitalist Western countries that the Soviets are out to conquer the world. They're out to like get communism to end capitalism all over the world. And that's going to end our way of life. And we're suspicious of that guy. I think from the Soviet perspective, we're going to talk more about this tomorrow. From the Soviet perspective, they're like, look, capitalists have tried to destroy us for years. And they're suspicious of capitalism's motivations. From their perspective, it's like, well, yeah, the elites, they want the system to stay the way it's always been because they get to take advantage of the workers. So this is why Karl Marx is casting a shadow over this whole thing. What are the true intentions? What are the true motivations of the Soviet Union? What are the true motivations of capitalist countries and governments in those countries? In February of that year of 1946, there's a spy ring in Canada that gets discovered. And the purpose of the spy ring was to try to infiltrate the United States, especially the scientific community, and figure out how the United States built the bomb. The Soviets are trying to steal the technology or steal the know-how in how to build an atomic bomb, which would then, of course, level the playing field from a military perspective. And so this, of course, scares a lot of people in the Western world. And then the final thing, or the next thing that really establishes the United States and Russia as enemies is a speech by Winston Churchill. He comes into a university in Missouri and gives what becomes known as the Iron Curtain speech, in which he basically says, look, an Iron Curtain has fallen across Europe. And he basically says from the Baltic to the Adriatic that there's this communist curtain, Iron Curtain, separating free Western countries, free Western Europe, from communist Eastern Europe. And this really galvanizes American opinion that, uh-oh, the Soviet Union is out to take more and more and more territory, and we better do something to stop it. Hey, Truman, what have you been doing to stop it? Oh, you've been meeting with Stalin? You're trying to be friends with this guy? And so a lot of American opinion kind of turns against Truman and saying, wait, our government has got to do a lot more to be anti communist. It's going to get us into this next Red Scare in the 1950s. So hopefully that gives you a little bit understanding of how we go from cooperation to conflict. It's a step by step process where the mindset of the Soviet Union is different than that of the United States and Britain. That they've got different goals, different objectives, different concerns. And we go from a spirit of cooperation to a spirit of distrust. And we're concerned that the motivations of the other side is against us. So this is the origins of where the Cold War is. That's going to develop into this war of ideology between the Soviet Union and communist allied countries on one side and Western capitalist countries, democracies on the other side. Thanks for watching.